Chapter 124. As an alchemy apprentice, although Weisher was extremely biased, he still knew a thing or two about the famous people in the history of alchemy. In recent times, it was Newton, one of the most outstanding creators. In old times, it was the oldest scholar, Socrates, and in a slightly earlier period of time, the most famous was undoubtedly his current mission target, Paracelsus, the alchemy grandmaster, who was famous for the man-made philosopher's stone. The name Paracelsus was actually his self-proclaimed name, and his real name was stinky and long. Weisher only vaguely remembered that the beginning was Phillips and the ending was Hohenheim. Hohenheim. The beginning letter was H. If this wasn't Hohenheim, then what was it? Could it be Hermes? AI Ching, I have a bold idea. Please put away your bold idea. AI Ching said indifferently, this is not a mobile game, nor is it a virtual world. In history, Paracelsus has never changed his gender. Until he was killed by the Holy Ghost Church for tarnishing creationism, he was still a man, and from the portrait, although he was old, he was quite handsome. Weisher was stunned for a moment, and immediately retorted, maybe he's a cross-dresser. Look at her. She still has white hair. AI Ching seemed to be shocked by his amazing idea, and after a long time, she sighed helplessly. At the entrance of the restaurant, there is a passenger list at the reception desk. You can see her name directly by looking at the table number. Is that so? Weisher got up, indicated that he was going to the toilet, and walked to the door. After casually chatting with the waiter there, he lowered his head and glanced at the list on the table. After the dice sounded, he saw a name. Hell. Weisher was puzzled. Hell? AI Ching was silent for a moment and corrected, no, it should be Hela. These two were actually the same name, but the meaning they represented was particularly ominous. The Norse goddess of death, Hela. Maybe it's a fake name? Weisher still didn't give up. After all, this name was a bit of an alchemist style. AI Ching became more and more helpless. Then what do you want to do? Test it? Weisher hesitated for a moment, and then went straight forward, politely stood in front of the table, and greeted the girl who was eating, then reached out and smiled. Hey, hello. KP, I want to charm her. Wait. AI Ching was stunned, but KP didn't give Weisher a chance to return. He threw the dice for him expectantly. Weisher didn't hide her actions from the other players. In an instant, all eyes were on the two spinning 10-sided dice on the table. The first die, 0. Okay, this is a sure. Before Weisher could rejoice, she saw the second die stop. It was still a 0. 0, 0. He felt that this number was not good. Besides, how could he judge 2 zeros? Oh, 2 zeros is 100 points. KP, after a brief moment of astonishment, showed a gloating expression and made the judgment. Congratulations, this is no longer the level of a skill failure, but a big failure. Until now, AI Ching finally flipped to the description of a big failure in the rule book. No matter how high the skill points were, it was impossible to succeed absolutely. And during the judgment, as long as one rolled 100 points, they would inevitably face the punishment of a big failure. In other words, not only would the player's skill not succeed, but they would also suffer unexpected negative effects because of their own clumsy failure. For example, when unlocking a lock, the tweezers broke and pierced into the flesh. When climbing, the back of the head hit a rock after falling. Simply put, it was like trying to draw a tiger, but not a dog. Encountering the player's big failure, KP seemed to be excited and said with a hint of malice, just as Weisher was hitting on this strange lady, he accidentally caught a glimpse of her plate out of the corner of his eye. At that moment, Weisher saw it. In that eerily perfect round vessel, there were countless densely packed slender objects entangled together in a way that defied the laws of physics, forming a strange shadow of non-Euclidean space. And in the darkness between them, A viscous blood-colored liquid slowly seeped out, crazily and slowly drowning the dark green remains. The seemingly reasonable but unimaginable way of composition gave Huaishur a strange illusion, as if the crack of the abyss had opened in front of him, choosing to swallow him. In a trance, there was a buzzing in his ears, countless crazy chants sounded chaotically, and in the end converged into a shuddering scream. Aramam! Ramen! Ramen! Finally, KP made a cold judgment. After witnessing this inconceivably cruel scene, Huaishur's rationality has decreased by 1. In an instant, Huaishur's vision turned black, and he felt a chill soak him, making him almost unable to stand steadily. He was so shocked by the scene in front of him that he almost screamed. Ai Ching also felt the same and covered her forehead, moaning in pain. KP, what did she eat? KP showed a pleasant smile. A plate of spaghetti. What the hell spaghetti? For the first time, Huaishur was traumatized by a bowl of spaghetti. In a trance, his legs went soft, and he subconsciously held on to the thing in front of him. He finally stood firm and breathed a sigh of relief. Then he realized that the surroundings seemed to have suddenly quieted down. Everyone looked back in astonishment, looking at Huaishur's hand, the hand pressing on the girl's chest. Subconsciously, Huaishur's 5 fingers contracted. It felt soft. Okay, Huaishur said to Ai Ching, at least I can now conclude that she is not a crossdresser. Slap. Huaishur's vision turned black, and he was slapped to the ground. The strength of the girl named Hila was incredible. With 1 blow, she took 3 HP from Huaishur. Huaishur only had 24 HP, which was equivalent to being hit in the back of the head with a stick. It was understandable. If it was Huaishur, he might have directly kicked this bastard into the sea. Immediately afterward, the girl looked at him coldly, left the table angrily, and left. She just happened to pass by the old captain, who was walking in. When Huaishur finally got up, he heard the captain's voice on the podium in front of the restaurant. According to the advance instructions of my employer, I need to bring his greetings to you on the first day you board the ship. After taking a sip of wine, the bearded captain put his eyes close to the paper in his hand, and then read the handwriting on it word by word. First of all, thank you for setting off to the new world after receiving my invitation. I will prepare a warm reception in the new world to welcome your arrival. After perfunctorily reading the above words, the captain put away the paper, smacked his lips, and his expression became serious. Next, I will announce a ban. After 9 o'clock tonight, please go back to your rooms to rest. If you need anything, you can ring the bell to summon us, but you are not allowed to go out before 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. You are not allowed to enter the warehouse, and you are not allowed to start a fight. This is the rules set by my employer. Don't ask me why. I don't know why I have to take you poor people to the new world. If you don't want to comply, you can leave this ship at any time and swim back to Rome. I won't force you. He seemed to be dissatisfied with the poor passengers who didn't seem to have anything to gain from them. He put away the paper and turned away, leaving behind a few burly crew members armed with weapons, ready to reason with the passengers who raised different opinions. But the expected riots, complaints, and even protests did not appear. Most people obediently finished their dinner and went to their cabins. Huaishur and the others looked at each other with a puzzled expression. That's not right. Yin Yen noticed the problem. Since we are not allowed to go out, why is there a rule that we are not allowed to go to the warehouse and not allowed to fight? Several people thought for a while, but they were also puzzled. This was no longer a ban. It was almost like a guide, luring passengers to go to the warehouse in the middle of the night to investigate. And now it seemed that all the passengers on this ship were invited by the mysterious employer. What does he want to do? In the whispered discussion, there were not many people left in the restaurant. Aware of the sailors' eyes, they could only reluctantly get up and go back to the cabin. From 8 o'clock, there was silence outside the cabin, and no sound could be heard. Looking out through the peephole, there was not a single shadow. It seemed like everyone was asleep. This situation lasted until 12 o'clock, until KP asked, "Okay, it's time to sleep. Does anyone have any other actions? If you don't have enough rest, the next day's judgment will be reduced." The inspectors were silent. They looked at each other and did not speak. Only Eugene was stubborn and could not suppress his curiosity. "I want to go out and sneak out to take a look." KP nodded. "What about the others?" The others hesitated, and no one spoke. "Sleep." Weisher sighed. "There's everything in dreams." "Okay." KP shrugged, regretfully. A moment later, he suddenly said, "Then, except for you, June, if the others are willing, they can vote for extremely hard, which has a 50% success rate." Weisher had already fallen asleep on the bed the moment he said sleep. He only vaguely heard the sound of dice. Then he heard KP's words. "In your sleep, you heard faint screams. This caused your sleep to be exceptionally unsteady. As a result, your HP recovery has decreased a little." What was this? Weisher was dumbfounded. An unexpected disaster? Rip. Suddenly, a crisp sound rang in everyone's ears, as if paper was being torn. In that instant, AI Ching suddenly saw Eugene's inspector suddenly stiffen and twitch violently, as if he had seen an inconceivable and terrifying shadow. His face contorted in fear, and then he vomited a large mouthful of blood. Soon, his figure quickly dimmed and disappeared from the table. Eugene left. Chapter 125. It wasn't just KP who deliberately blocked their reactions. Except for AI Ching, who suddenly looked up, the others were still staring at the form on the table, holding the dice in their hands without any reaction. AI Ching stared at the table and saw the blood Eugene spat out before he left. After a long time, she slowly looked up. "They're dead." "Don't think of me as such an evil person, madam." KP smiled and looked behind AI Ching. "After all, I didn't set such harsh rules with others." AI Ching suddenly looked back and saw two figures on the shabby sofa in the corner of the room. It was Eugene and his inspector. They were still alive, but there was nothing left except for being alive. There was no longer any brilliance in his eyes. His pupils were dilated and dull. He just sat on the sofa, motionless, and drool slowly dripped from the corner of his mouth. A walking corpse. "See, I told you they're still alive, right?" KP smiled. "They just lost all their sanity. What's the difference between being alive and being dead?" "There's a big difference. Compared to the huge price of losing one's life, it's just sacrificing some sanity and losing some dignity. Even if their souls don't collapse, they can find a sanatorium with better conditions and recover in about 5 or 6 years. I think the price I charge is already quite merciful, right?" KP glanced at AI Ching's character card indifferently. "Compared to others, you need to worry more about yourself. After all, they just lost their sanity when they died. But you..." Tisk. AI Ching made a sound of displeasure but didn't say anything. Just as KP was about to continue the game, his phone on the table suddenly vibrated. He picked it up and looked at it, raising his eyebrows. It seems that many viewers are dissatisfied with this kind of slow game." "Viewers?" AI Ching frowned. "Didn't I say?" KP seemed to have just remembered and smiled. "This game is being broadcasted live on the border of the dark net. Now, the number of viewers worldwide has reached 30,000, and the paid viewers are about to break through 3,000. That's really worth celebrating. There's no need to worry. I've protected everyone's privacy for the time being. It's just that the audience's opinions need to be respected." He pondered for a moment, as if he was in a difficult position. After a long time, he sighed helplessly. All right. Let's update the version then. After all, my goal is to let everyone better enjoy the fun of this story, not to dissuade people with tedious numerical calculations and long rule books. He paused for a moment and revealed his signature smile. Then, let's comply with the audience's demand. From now on, the game would omit the tedious process of casting and judgment, leaving it to the autonomous probability judgment terminal to make the judgment, fully simulating reality. Everything is to give the players and audience the most realistic gaming experience. As he spoke, he snapped his fingers and pitifully announced, "Everyone, the gentle tutorial level is about to end. Next, the game will enter the hard difficulty level." Huaisher fell asleep. Huaisher had a dream. He could clearly feel that he was sinking into darkness and was gradually falling downwards. Pain, cold, hunger, loneliness, despair, and numbness. In this seemingly eternal darkness, countless emotions emerged from his chest as if he was abandoned by the whole world. He couldn't even find an inch of land to keep himself. But in this desperate coldness, a crack seemed to appear in the dark abyss sky. From it, a sacred light shone down. Like a ray of light from a lighthouse, it reflected the figure standing in the deeper darkness. Huaisher couldn't see the face because it was too handsome and solemn. Huaisher couldn't judge his age because there seemed to be the vicissitudes of life and the innocence of a child at the same time. He couldn't even determine the person's gender because that kind of pure beauty seemed to have transcended the category of gender and entered the realm of holiness. His solemn robes were stained with traces of blood that didn't match the color of blood, and it tainted the holiness of his robes. Thus, he fell from paradise and fell into the abyss. But no matter how deep the darkness was, it couldn't stain that pure white crown. As if it was cast from all the light in the world, boundless majesty and brutality adorned it like jewels, stinging every pair of eyes that dared to look at it. In that instant, Huaisher saw that figure slowly raise his eyes and look up at the endless world from the abyss. Thus, the darkness surged like a tide. Countless hoarse voices overlapped, turning into a deafening roar of thunder. Listen, this is the will of the White Crown King. Revere the majesty of the god, of the mortal world. It was like the abyss was roaring. The supreme decree is announced here. You only need to listen. This is the destiny of the heavens. You only need to obey. Then everything froze. It was like the entire world was tamed and listening to the words of that figure. Thus, there was a low and gentle voice. Those calm words echoed in the abyss, stirring up a frenzy like the aftermath of the movement of the stars. Today, I will erect a monument in a barren land. The supreme White Crown King gave a decree. Losers who have not succumbed to adversity and still have a glimmer of hope for the future. If you still have the courage, prove your strength and talent and head to this brand new continent. When the time comes, I will wait here with this rebellious monument for everyone's arrival. Amidst the deathly stillness of time, the Supreme King laughed aloud and declared, "The era that belongs to us is about to arrive." In that instant, Huaisher woke up from his dream. He was sweating profusely, his head hurt faintly, and he only felt dizzy. It wasn't just him. All the inspectors suddenly panted violently, and cold sweat seeped out of their foreheads. A faint sound of dice rolling could be heard, forcefully deducting 1 point of rationality from all the players. But what was frightening was that the moment they woke up, the memories in the dream quickly blurred and dissipated. In the end, other than a few fragments in a trance, it was difficult to recall the entire dream. Except for Huaisher. "White Crown King?" A.I. Ching asked in disbelief. "Are you sure he called himself the White Crown King?" Huaisher read the records in the Book of Destiny again. "Yes, is he an important person?" Ai Ching asked in return. Hundreds of years ago, he single-handedly started the great immigration movement and joined forces with the Inca pedigree and other second-rate pedigrees. He started from scratch and created the American pedigree, one of the 6 great pedigrees today. That natural enemy, do you think he's third-rate? Huaishur was stunned. Immediately, he trembled. He was really trembling. Why did he get involved in such a big shot's matter just by taking in a fragment of the Philosopher's Stone? After he reacted, he finally knew who Ai Ching was talking about. The first fallen morning star in history, the former manager of the Holy Spirit pedigree, was said to be a member of the fallen gods. During his most glorious period, his power was extremely great, and he was even known as the deputy ruler of the kingdom of heaven. 1,000 years ago, he was the true master of this world. 1,000 years later, the miracles and changes he created still deeply affected this world. Purely in terms of correction value, he alone could reach more than 30%. 1/3 of the world was turbulent and changed because of him. And under his will, it became what it was today. Even the rise of the Astronomical Society was after him, compared to such a big shot who was so high that he didn't even know where he was. A newbie like him couldn't even be compared to dust. So why did he appear here? Now it seemed that the power that led Van Helsing and Paracelsus to the same boat hundreds of years ago in 1620 came from his hand. No, I'm afraid all the passengers were his handiwork. Ai Ching covered her aching forehead and whispered almost like a moan, "It's 1620 now. Why sure? I should have thought of it. I should have thought of it." Thought of what? She didn't speak again and fell into silence, as if she had entered deeper thought. Soon, Huaishur heard a sharp scream coming from outside the door. Then it turned into a heartbroken cry. "My Bobby! My Bobby! Ah!" The old woman cried out hoarsely. "Who killed my Bobby? Who? Ah, God, I curse you! I curse you! Your soul will be sealed in the eternal winter of Siberia. Ah, my Bobby, my poor child, who was so cruel to you." Huaishur pushed open the door and walked out in shock. She saw that there were already many people in the corridor looking curiously at the old woman who was kneeling and crying in front of the stairs. There was also the mangled corpse in her arms. That was a chicken? Huaishur narrowed his eyes in disbelief. It was indeed a chicken. He could vaguely tell that it was indeed a big rooster that used to be quite handsome and mighty. If it stood up, it would probably be the size of a turkey. But now it was dead, cruelly disemboweled. Huaishur could even tell from Van Helsing's experience that the chicken had been bitten to death, disemboweled, and even its internal organs eaten. So tragic! He couldn't help but whisper, "Did everyone not sleep last night and go to eat chicken on the ship?" It seemed to make sense. Soon, the serious-looking old Shao came over and said to him in a low voice, "Yujun is missing. Everyone gather in my room later." He left and has now become a retard. Ai Ching said in his mind, "Do you need me to describe in detail how he licked the saliva on the ground?" Huaishur was stunned and then frantically refused. "Then don't do anything else." "Huaishur," Ai Ching reminded. "Also, be careful of old Shao." "What's wrong with him?" "He didn't do much." Ai Ching said, "At this time, you have to be careful of anyone who tries to take the initiative. To be exact, everyone." For a moment, he had nothing to say. In the silence, only the old woman's heart-wrenching cries could be heard. But soon, sharp screams came from the deck, and chaos suddenly spread. Someone died. To be exact, all the crew members died. Chapter 126. When Huaishur and the others rushed to the deck, not a single person could be seen. All the sailors had disappeared, or rather, they were all dead. Only a handful of pale ashes and a set of 80% new uniforms were left in place. "Wait," 80% new, it seemed that the detection skill was quite successful. Weischer actually found additional information, such as the age of the uniforms and even the material of the ashes. Weischer put on his gloves, carefully picked up a handful, and sniffed. Thanks to Van Helsing's excellent alchemy, he almost immediately distinguished the composition inside: calcium, carbon, phosphorus, sodium, and so on. Almost all of them were found in the human body. In other words, these were the crewmen's ashes? Weischer found it hard to believe that there was some kind of power that could burn all the crewmen to ashes from the inside out in an instant, but it did not leave a single burn mark on the uniforms. It could be seen that these guys basically did not have any reaction or struggle before they were burned to ashes in an instant, and it was done with all of them. Otherwise, there would have been no abnormality. Such a large number and such a terrifying degree of accuracy. Was it really possible for humans to achieve this? But when he rummaged through the ashes, he found a burnt piece of paper. When he carefully rummaged through the other ashes, he found the same piece of paper among them. It was burned to ashes in an instant, but those fragile pieces of paper still maintained their curled appearance and were extremely fragmented upon contact. With the amazing vision of a vampire, Weischer nodded. He distinguished and followed words written on the charred and carbonized pieces of paper and sneaked into the cabin, silently running toward the captain's room had the same name. Whether or not the captain existed at this time, decisively concluded, if there was anything fishy about androids, there would be some trace of it in the captain's cabin. Through alchemy, even if there was nothing, Weischer could not at least find information about the ship. Of course, he knew about androids. However, in fact, speed had already slowed down, often used in alchemy, as he sped and could all the way to have a rather ancient history. He saw this kind of puppet rushing towards the captain's various metals. It was not just large amount of water, and the others. No self-consciousness. The rather strange couple from the restaurant almost be said that it was also rushing towards the captain's quarters. Before making as they ran forward, the maker would put a piece of paper with a name written on it into a container, still scolding her man and used this name to make them work. But when they suddenly pushed open the door of the captain's androids could only exist for a day, and a night. It was empty. No matter when it was born, nothing else was exposed to the sunlight of the next day. One could see the captain's automatically dissipate, and the remains of his ashes. This was a flaw that could not be avoided. There was still wine in the tilted wine bottle on the ground, and the entire crew was made up of androids. That at the last moment, before he dissipated, it looked so he was still drinking wine and did not expect it was the destruction that would happen a moment later. Stop daydreaming. Or perhaps he had expected it, but chose to enjoy himself. Go to the captain's room now. Now, the wine bottle had fallen to the ground, soaked in the ashes after he dissipated. In the dust, a wildflower that seemed to have been picked from a tree on the shore could be seen. There was still a faint fragrance left. It was as if it had found the meaning of life in the short time of its death. So when it left, it was as if it had been liberated. It was clearly a puppet with a body, but it was like a real human. Among the people who followed behind, someone cried out softly. When Weischer looked back, he saw a stunned Hela. She glanced at the ashes on the ground, and her expression changed. It seemed to be pity. Soon, she turned and left. Nothing. Weischer sighed and turned to leave, but his footsteps suddenly stopped. In the chaos of people and the sound of rummaging around, he heard an extra footstep. Thanks to the vampire's excellent hearing and vision, Weischer even saw the dust on the ground fly up for no reason. It was as if it was stuck in the gap of a pair of shoes. He narrowed his eyes and stared at the few specks of dust that quietly left in the chaos. He followed the footsteps from afar and followed them. It seemed like he was strolling. He walked to the back of the now empty deck and looked at the faint light of dawn in the distance. He sighed, lowered his head, and took out a bag of tobacco and a stack of white paper. He skillfully rolled one and lit it at the corner of his mouth. Then he pulled out a knife from behind his waist. The knife whistled and slashed at the footsteps that quietly left behind him. Come out! In the blink of an eye, the blade broke through the air. A figure suddenly appeared in the void and blocked the knife. It was the figure of Yin. The Red Hat's stealth ability was indeed terrifying. Even the unique thermal vision of vampires could not find any trace of him. However, Yan's stealth skills were terrible. He did not even notice the 2 dust particles that followed him. "Don't do it!" He waved his hand in panic. "They're on the same side. They're on the same side. You're on the same side as me." An ear-piercing sound burst out. The knife brushed past his ear and nailed to the deck, startling him. Before he could react, Weisher held him down and choked him. "Brother, spare me, spare me." He widened his eyes and raised his hands. "I surrender, I surrender. How about it? We don't have to fight over that stinking woman, AI Ching, right?" Weisher was stunned and immediately shuddered. How did he know that he was moving freely and not being controlled by AI Ching? "I'm familiar with her, brother, much more familiar than you." Yin saw his stunned expression and knew that he guessed right. He could not help but grin. "I know who that mad dog is going to bite when she opens her mouth. You're too harmless. You're so harmless that even I feel that you're pure. Don't kill me. I'll give you money when we get out. How about that? Don't worry, I won't tell anyone else." "Really? Besides, it's not worth risking your life for that cripple. You don't know how many people she's tricked, do you? As long as there's profit, she would even sell her own father." Bang! Weisher was expressionless. He raised his hand and punched out one of Yan's teeth. "No one will think you're dead if you don't say a few words." Yan obediently shut up. He raised his hands and blinked his eyes. AI Ching did not seem to be ready to express her opinion. She left everything to Weisher to decide. "What did you take from the captain's room?" Weisher asked coldly. "Don't lie. You only have one chance. You have to understand that even if we're teammates, it doesn't have to be you." Yin had definitely rushed into the captain's cabin at the first moment. The fake door that opened with a push was one of the pieces of evidence. If he did not find anything, there was no need for him to hide and sneak out. He could just stand there. I'm just afraid of trouble." Weisher heard and coldly pulled out a poisoned throwing knife from his sleeve. "If you lie again, I'll ask your cousin how to use it on you." Wait. Yin hurriedly begged for mercy. When he was about to speak, his eyes suddenly lit up. He looked behind Weisher with a surprised expression. Weisher sneered and did not look back. "You want to use this kind of trick on me, Lu Peiqi of Huaihai? You think too much. I've been playing this kind of trick since I was 8 years old." "Young man, but what are you going to do to my dear,
a sharp and
gloomy
companion?"
voice suddenly rang out from
Weisher
behind
turned
him,
around in
which
shock,
should have been
only
empty, to see an old noblewoman behind her. Her luxurious dress was now stained with blood, and she was holding a dead chicken in her hand. Her hair was disheveled, and she looked like a madwoman. But such an old lunatic appeared behind him inexplicably. Yin took the opportunity to break free from his restraint and then hid beside her. He kept sweet-talking her. "Dear, you came at the right time. Otherwise, the secret I wanted to share with you would have been taken away by this guy." As he spoke, he took out a piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to the old woman like a loyal dog. Weisher's sharp eyes found that the paper in his hand was the captain's relic. Yes, it was the piece of paper that the captain took out and read in the restaurant last night. The crazy woman looked at Weisher coldly. A murderous intent locked on him, making him break out in a cold sweat. Was he going to die in the hands of this bastard's lover today? Damn, I knew you were a traitor. But soon, the murderous intent dissipated as she took the piece of paper from Yan's hand. When she lowered her eyes to look at the paper, she was stunned for a moment. Then unconcealable astonishment and fear appeared on her face. Her hands trembled. Weisher stood on tiptoe and quietly glanced at the paper. He saw that it was exactly the words that the captain read in public last night, but there was an additional signature. It was a strange signature. It seemed to be a scribbled ancient character, but the writing was not limited to the usual left to right or top to bottom. Instead, it turned on the paper almost at will. The corners were sharp, and in the end, the head and the tail were connected. It turned into a star-like pattern. Wisps of pitch-black ink spread out from its trajectory, radiating in all directions like the light of stars. Huaishir could almost distinguish the scribbled characters. It was the record that Crow forcibly brainwashed him into the Book of Destiny when he taught him the origin of alchemy. It was one of the oldest languages in the West, Hebrew. Heller, Ben, Shahar. He frowned and stammered out the characters on the paper. At that moment, the old woman suddenly looked up. Her originally blue eyes had turned blood red. He didn't know whether it was because of fear or madness. Her distorted face spasmed, and she roared at him. "Don't say that name." Chapter 127. After seeing the signature, the old woman completely fell into madness. Her mouth muttered something incomprehensible. There was a lot of local language from the Russian Federation, and there were even more swear words and insults. Soon, she clutched the piece of paper tightly. With bloodshot eyes, she ignored Yin Yen and Huaishir and rushed straight into the cabin. In her hand, she had already broken the neck of the chicken that had died long ago. Sticky blood dripped from her feet all the way to the ground. Yin Yen didn't dare to stay in front of Huaishir alone and hurriedly followed. Huaishir also followed from a distance. He wanted to know what she was going to do and why that name made the old woman have such a big reaction. Soon he saw it. In the dining room, the crazy woman was entangled with his poor brother. He could hear her shrill voice from afar. "You lied to me. You've been lying to me." She seemed to have gone crazy. She shook her old brother, who was about to die at any time, and screamed angrily, "You know that curse, you know what we're going to face. You liar. Why did you bring me here?" The poor old man was originally sitting in a wheelchair, holding a spoon to eat porridge. Now that he was being pulled and shaken by her, he couldn't breathe at all. He coughed violently, and his face turned purple from choking. Even the cereal was spurting out from his nostrils. Huaishir looked from a distance and didn't understand at all. "What's with that name?" "That's the name of the White Crown King, Huaishir." In his mind, Ai Qing's tired sigh came. "That's the message written by the White Crown King himself, just like the letter you received. From the moment we boarded the ship, we had already fallen into the White Crown King's plan." Huaishir was stunned for a moment and immediately felt like falling into an ice cave. What did he do to be schemed against by such a big shot? Don't even talk about scheming against him. That kind of big shot could kill him with just a glance. He wouldn't even be out of breath. Why bother? "I remember that you have alchemy tools in your equipment, right?" Ai Qing suddenly asked. "Can you make atomizers?" This was simple. Both Huaishir and Van Helsing knew how to do it. After all, it was a basic consumable used in alchemy. "Very good. I need you to go back immediately and work on something according to my instructions." After Huaishir heard this, he couldn't help but be stunned in place. "Is there a need for this kind of thing?" "Confirm a guess." "Hurry up. Huaishir, hurry up." AI Ching whispered hoarsely, "We don't have much time left." A quarter of an hour later, Huai Shi returned to the restaurant. The process of making an atomizing agent was quite simple. It didn't even need to be ignited. It only needed to simply mix a few powders and liquids together. If one did not pursue the ultimate effect, they would not even pay attention to the proportion. As soon as he entered, he saw old Xiao and the others in the corner looking around nervously. When they saw Huai Shi, they waved for him to come over. At this time, the restaurant was almost full. There was a hubbub of voices. After all, after the initial panic, all the passengers instinctively wanted to huddle together for warmth. Even if they couldn't trust each other, they would still gather in places with more people and then blankly exchange their opinions and unreliable messages. Although they had lost all the crew, fortunately, after inspection, they found that the food reserves were quite abundant. It was even enough for them to survive at sea for half a year, but they had to cook their own food. And the ship was still moving. It was as if it had entered unmanned mode. After leaving the control of the crew, it was still sailing toward its destination, but its speed was getting faster and faster. At this moment, they were already in the vast Pacific Ocean with no way out. As they passed through the crowd, Huai Shi saw Yin Yen. He was still by the old woman's side, throwing all kinds of sweet words at her, as if they didn't cost money. It seemed like he was determined to curry favor with this old golden thigh. But he didn't see the girl called Gila. He didn't know where she went. After sitting down, Huai Shi saw the complicated expressions on old Xiao and the others' faces. He did not hide it and simply told them the information. All the crew members are cyborgs. The captain has a manuscript on him for him to read. It's signed by White Crown King. The amount of information was so huge that old Xiao and Lei Feizhou couldn't react in time. Just as they were stunned, a muffled sound suddenly came from the corner of the restaurant, as if a bottle in a bag had broken. Then a wisp of silver mist gushed out from it, and in an instant it spread wildly in the wind blowing in from outside the window. It was silver nitrate. It consumed half of Huai Shi's stock of silver liquid, which was enough to poison a vampire to death. With the explosion of the atomizer, instantly spread and covered the entire hall, but the amount was so diluted that it was like eating a mouthful of mustard. Huai Shi didn't know what AI Ching wanted to do, but he still chose to do as she said. Now, as the mist spread, violent coughing sounds could be heard. Huai Shi subconsciously pulled up his collar to cover his face, not to guard against the poisonous gas, but to prevent his protruding canine teeth from being exposed under the stimulation of the silver poison. But then he saw, under the shroud of the silver mist that could only stimulate dark creatures, pairs of scarlet eyes lit up in the entire restaurant. All that could be seen was that kind of ferocious red light. With the erosion of the silver mist, some of the fragile camouflage cracked open, and a trace of blood-like stench and pure dark aura leaked out. At that moment, Huai Shi finally realized. It wasn't just them, it was the monster lurking in the crowd. It was the entire ship. All the passengers were dark creatures. In an instant, those originally numb, old, or dull faces became lively and ferocious, and those old or lethargic eyes also burst out with the cold light of a predator. All the lies were torn apart at this moment, along with the camouflage on them. It was as if they didn't expect such a result. Everyone was stunned on the spot. Only Huai Shi heard AI Ching's sigh. As expected, as early as KP mentioned 1620, she should have thought of it. 1620, just before the establishment of the American genealogy. At that time, the banished Morning Star, the former deputy of the Kingdom of Heaven, and the future White Crown King had already crossed the sea and established his own country on the new continent, a paradise belonging to the otherworldlings. Unfortunately, this paradise was empty, just like hell and heaven. Huai sure heard Ai Qing's hoarse whisper. And on this ship, everyone, I'm afraid, are the members he chose for the American genealogy. There was a moment of dead silence. Then, an even noisier noise swallowed everything. Chaos arrived. Originally, Huai sure thought that this might be some dangerous scheme of Paracelsus. For example, using a ship's worth of people to refine the man-made philosopher's stone. But he didn't expect that this was no longer the criminal plan of a local mafia boss, nor was it something that a tool like Van Helsing assured Huai could interfere with. Suddenly, it directly rose to an international level, and even more exaggerated than this. This made him completely at a loss for a moment. It can't be like this, right? Even if the club was recruiting, it was just setting up a table in the university square and giving out some free gifts to ask the juniors to give face and come another day. How could they suddenly force people to buy and sell? Just casually boarding a ship and changing their nationality. Who could stand this? Moreover, I'm a spy. Isn't this bastard afraid of recruiting a traitor and stabbing him in the back? Huai sure asked in a low voice. Don't guess what people of that level will do. Why sure? Because it's meaningless. Their perspective is already different from us mortals, and even fate and time are just their playthings. Then why did he issue a ticket to a traitor like Van Helsing? This can only mean one thing, Ai Qing said indifferently. When he issued this ticket, he concluded that Van Helsing would become a part of the American genealogy and follow him from the bottom of his heart. At that moment, Huai sure shuddered. Was all of this really under the control of the White Crown King? If it included the grudges between Van Helsing and Paracelsus, then did it include himself, who returned to this ship 400 or 500 years later? Were those kings who had transcended time coldly closing the door on this lame farce at the end of time? Just as he was thinking, the noise and chaos in the restaurant had spread. When everyone's hidden faces were exposed, the chaos caused by the initial astonishment and questioning had turned into shoving and fighting, especially the dark creatures who didn't know how to retreat and understand. The situation was getting more and more intense until a scream came from the window. Everyone turned back in shock. They saw the light of the morning sun. It was so warm and gentle, reflecting the blue sea and showing the sparkling waves. Coupled with the gentle sea breeze, it was a perfect start to the day. But soon, Huai sure discovered that something was amiss. The light was rapidly dimming. From the initial gentleness, it rapidly weakened to the point of a candle in the wind. But what was even more frightening was that the sun, which had been slowly rising, began to fall at this moment. As if remembering that the tail numbers were restricted today, the sun, which had just gone out, began to reverse into the warehouse, taking away its brilliance from the human world bit by bit, until finally it disappeared under the sea in an instant. Time reversed. The darkness before dawn arrived. But this time there was no light. The night swallowed everything. The huge cruise ship suddenly shook and burst out with a roar. Sailing in the darkness and galloping on the lightless sea, it was as if gradually sinking into the abyss. In the restaurant, silence arrived. The endless darkness didn't give these foreign creatures who were active in the darkness the slightest sense of security. On the contrary, a deep fear emerged from everyone's heart. Along with it, there was a sudden realization, perhaps because the Son of Redemption had abandoned them. This world was indifferently staring at their struggling faces. They laughed evilly, waiting for death to come to them. Chapter 128. There was an old joke. It was said that someone on a boat encountered a storm. He suddenly realized that this was God's punishment, so he quickly knelt down and prayed, asking for forgiveness for the sake of other innocent people. At this moment, a sneering question came from the sky. Do you think it's easy for me to gather this boat of people? It's like you think this is some kind of Hollywood special effects film. At most, it's like Michael Bay. Everyone has enough popcorn. After the opening credits, they saw the director's name, Kitano Takashi. The entire boat was filled with villains. Suddenly, everyone seemed to want to die a horrible death. What the F***CK is this? AI Ching gritted her teeth and suppressed her displeasure. She had already expected what would happen. In history, the White Crown King had sent countless black boats to various parts of the world, but very few could return to the New World, although most of the elites of the American lineage rode. Such boats, all the way, there must have been more than 10 times or even 100 times sunk into the ocean before that. Whether or not they would even stay in the present realm was still a question. According to the statistics of the Historical Redaction Committee, the wreckage of this black ship had been excavated in various borders and hell. In other words, its route wasn't as simple as going from one continent to another. The moment they left the port, they were probably no longer in the present realm. Otherwise, there would not be such a strange phenomenon like the sun fading and the eternal night shrouding. No one could resist the self-correction of the present realm to maintain such a huge change, unless it was in hell. Only such a scene could be realized. The curse of the gods. This strange phenomenon was called so. This world did not allow the rise of the White Crown King. In other words, the gods who still existed in this world in the past and even controlled this world did not allow this traitor to stand on his own. Even if they were temporarily helpless against the White Crown King, who was far away in the New World, they would never let go of any opportunity to eradicate his wings. But most of the people on this boat did not think of seeking refuge with the White Crown King, right? Why sure sighed. A few clubs are fighting for people. How can they make things difficult for newbies? AI Ching sneered and asked back, when you moved a chess piece forward on the chessboard, was it your own will, or did you get the permission of the chess piece? Huaisher was silent. He understood what AI Ching meant. What the chess piece was thinking was not important. The most important thing was where exactly it was located. If they were insignificant, it would not matter if they were abandoned, but if they were located in a dangerous place, then they would be ruthlessly strangled. The so-called human intelligence and human knowledge are too weak. Why sure? AI Ching said coldly, in the domain of the fifth step and above, with just a thought, one can easily twist it, just like a marionette. Not only do they have no control over their bodies, even their souls are the currency of the gods. The only difference is whose head is printed on it, and how much value is hidden behind it. Moreover, even if the gods still had mercy to squander, would there be an innocent person on this boat? Come on, everyone is a dark creature. What is the point of pretending? Including Huaisher's current level of disguise, who is not full of blood debts. The son of original sin. AI Ching finally remembered the story title that KP had shown at the beginning, and only now did she understand the deep malice hidden in it. What made her even angrier was that since KP's version update, the silhouettes of all the players were covered by a layer of darkness. It was impossible to see the reactions and expressions of others. Apart from a few words with no fluctuations or intonation in the communication between each other, it simply weakened the possibility of cooperation between the players to the greatest extent. Story. The story is the real deal, right? KP seemed to have glimpsed the anger in her heart and said with a smile, the communication between the characters is the most beautiful part of the story, not the players who are above it. If the characters are wantonly controlled and played by the higher dimensions, then what is the difference between what the gods did to humans in the past? AI Ching didn't say anything more, but Huaisher was under a lot of pressure. After learning about the bloody history of this dungeon from AI Ching, he no longer had much confidence in clearing this dungeon. Even if he, a demon hunter, killed all the dark creatures on the boat one by one, he wouldn't be able to kill them all in 10 days. Moreover, in this dark ocean, even the huge steel cruise ship couldn't bring him much sense of security. No matter how strong the ship was, how many dark creatures could tear it down? It could be said that as long as chaos broke out, everything would be destroyed, and Pericus could hide in the dark. As long as he didn't show up, Weisher would lose. Moreover, was Van Helsing's mission really so simple? Weisher didn't think all this would be so simple when it involved the struggle between the Holy Spirit lineage and the American lineage. If it was just a mission, how could there be a record in the Philosopher's Stone? Whose Philosopher's Stone is this? He was now puzzled from the bottom of his heart. It can't be the White Crown King's, right? Don't be kidding. The White Crown King has long been above the Fifth Order. The stigmata of fallen Morningstar is just a power imitated by later generations based on his miracle. A.I. Ching said, "It's most likely some lucky person on the boat who has successfully reached the New World." No, this means that this boat has a considerable chance of reaching the New World safely. Why sure, we still have a chance. Why sure knew, but he was worried that this chance would soon be gone, because the people on the boat were about to fight. Why sure, an indifferent player, might not be able to understand their situation at that time, nor could he feel the horror and despair of being abandoned by the whole world in an instant. But there was no doubt that for the dark creatures, chaos and fighting had long been an instinct engraved in their bones. After the initial fear, this strange, everlasting night brought about a bone-deep pressure and an indelible despair. Then, they were on the verge of madness. Weisher could almost see the fuse that was as fragile as a candle in the wind gradually collapsing. Don't get involved. Let's protect ourselves first. Old Xiao said in a low voice, "Come to my room later. The situation has changed. We need to take the long view." No one objected to this. At this critical juncture where chaos was about to break out, not to mention turning the tide, even self-preservation might become quite difficult. Even if the Third Order stigmata was already considered an expert among this group of dark creatures, who knew how many strong dragons were hidden among them. Weisher alone could feel a strong sense of oppression from several people, and he could not rule out the possibility that there were people at the fourth stage hiding among them. But unexpectedly, the one who stood out to turn the tide at this time was unexpectedly the woman in the restaurant who looked unusually worn out last night. She and her inflexible husband had left an unusually deep impression on Weisher. It was not just the huge difference between the husband and wife, but also their actions this morning. When they sensed that the crew had died, they immediately rushed in the direction of the captain's room. At least, it could be seen that their minds were still clear, and they knew that infighting at this time was tantamount to suicide. The woman who called herself Lady Eleanor tried her best to appease the people around her, and it seemed to be quite effective, until the old woman with the chicken's neck in her hand went crazy again. "Shut up, bitch. This is not a place for you to sell your sex life," she screamed angrily. "You don't know anything at all. Just for an illusory hope, you overestimated yourselves and stepped on this ship to seek your own death. Now that death is here, are you still afraid? What are you counting on? Counting on this group of losers to unite? Counting on this group of trash who have been chased by the Holy Spirit lineage for decades without daring to show their faces? Trash is trash no matter where they go. Do you think the White Crown King will protect you if the gods are cruel to you?" Some people glared angrily, but the old woman's expression became more and more ferocious. "Am I wrong? Who can you count on? This prostitute bitch? The one over there who only knows how to hug the cat and act pretentious? Or this rotten old man in a wheelchair who can't even speak clearly? Forget it. You can't count on anyone. Okay, shut up, Yaga. In the wheelchair, her brother finally spoke, hoarse and muddy. Don't say any more. What did I say? Yaga sneered. The truth? I said shut up. Her brother raised his muddy eyes and stared at her, some kind of terrifying light shooting out from his eyes. Don't you know that I am saving you? Ha ha, my good brother, you only want to save yourself. Yaga roared. You only want the White Crown King to extend your life. You did not hesitate to trick me onto this ship. I said shut up. Her brother spoke again, as if the authority of an elder brother had finally taken effect. Yaga's old face twitched, and she did not say anything more. She just screamed and turned to leave the restaurant. The chicken in her hand was still dripping blood, and her hysterical cursing and roaring could be vaguely heard from the corridor. I am sorry for what my sister said. In the silence, the old man in the wheelchair first looked at the young man in the corner. She did not mean it, but after my two nieces passed away, her actions were a little extreme. I know. The Egyptian young man holding the cat laughed arrogantly, with a hint of mockery. She is just a crazy girl. I will not care about anything because of her. The old man nodded. Is our alliance still in effect? Pharaoh? Of course, kosher. The pharaoh holding the cat glanced at the people around him indifferently, as if he was looking at dust. His eyes were contemptuous. Before we reach the new world, the Sphinx, and I will not do anything to you. Thank you for your generosity. The old man slowly turned his wheelchair and looked around. Did you hear that? Calm down, all of you. Other than this futile night, there is nothing we can do to the gods. The White Crown King will grant us protection. All you need to do is wait. He said, dawn will eventually come. It was like a lame joke, but no one could laugh. Huaisher sat on the chair in a daze, like an obedient child, with a pure expression and harmless eyes. Then his heart was beating wildly, and he did not have any strength to laugh. Yaga, kosher, the pharaoh, the Sphinx. Oh my God, what kind of fight was this? Chapter 129. Baba Yaga, or Granny Yaga. If there was anyone who could speak for the word, which it would be her. Since the birth of the witch, there were many horrible legends that had been spread among the Slavs. The witch who lived in a chicken's foot house, the refiner of the black magic potion, the eternal nightmare in the eternal frost wilderness and the forest, Kashchi, the immortal, the wizard, the shapeshifter, and even the representative of evil that could be written into the source of Slavic mythology. He also inherited the blood of God and had become famous hundreds of years ago. He could be said to be the role model of the Devil King. Until now, there was still a place called Kashchikovo in the Russian Federation. What was more terrible than his notoriety was his strong vitality. It was said that he hid his soul in a needle, and then hid the needle in a duck egg, and then hid the duck egg in a hare's stomach, and so on. Finally, he sealed everything on an oak tree in the endless sea. This way, people who couldn't find his soul couldn't really kill him. Perhaps the rumors were exaggerated. After all, he had become famous 700 years ago. 700 years. More than 20 generations had passed. Countless dynasties had risen and fallen, and the world had changed. Now, countless people at the same time had already declined, but he was still alive and well. He could even eat oatmeal, take a boat, and go out for a walk when he had nothing to do. As for the pharaoh and the Sphinx, there was no need to say more. If it was true, then one was a descendant of the true God, who inherited the blood of nobility, and the other was a fierce monster. It was just unknown which pharaoh it was, whether his title had been taken away, and how much of his power was left, and how many generations of the Sphinx were there. But no matter how weak the pharaoh was, Huaisher couldn't afford to provoke him. It was one thing for a quagmire to suddenly turn into a poisonous pond, but now, for crocodiles had appeared. Why sure, a newbie was at a loss for what to do. The others were also in a state of shock, dumbfounded. Only after the big shots had left did everyone heave a sigh of relief. How could there be so many big shots on such a small ship? Everyone suddenly felt a great deal of pressure. Huaisher, on the other hand, was under even more pressure. He knew that there was a hidden boss, Paracelsus, who could wield the Philosopher's Stone with his bare hands. He still had to think of a way to kill him. Oh my God! What could be
Is
more
this game
suitable
really meant for
than the
humans?
sacred mark
If he was
formed by
lucky,
countless miracles?
Parathussel
It
might
seems
not
that the
have a
order on the
Philosopher's
ship
Stone
can
on
be
him,
maintained
but
for the
if he
time
was
being.
unlucky,
Old Xiao
everyone
wiped
would
the
become
sweat
a
off his
Philosopher's
forehead
Stone
and
in
looked
his
at
plan.
Lei Feizhou
Even
and
an idiot would
Huaisher.
know that if
Our
such
top
an advanced
priority
gadget
is to
could be
explore the entire
manufactured,
ship. The materials
Lei Feizhou
needed to make
asked,
it must be
"Where's
very
Yin Yan?
expensive. The
Hasn't
Philosopher's
Yin Yan
Stone
already
itself
gotten on
was the
Papayah's good
embodiment
side?
of miracles.
Let him go
in the
and
mortal
gain
world.
some affection."
Old Xiao suggested, if possible, everyone should try to hang out with Kush and the Pharaoh to see if we can find any clues. Forget it, Huaisher's face turned green. Kush might look silly in his wheelchair, but it was hard to say whether he had Alzheimer's. As for the one holding the cat, he didn't look like someone easy to talk to. The way he looked at people as if they didn't exist meant that he didn't put these people in his eyes at all. If they rashly tried to strike up a conversation with him, it would be fine if they got snubbed, but if they made him unhappy and released the cat, who would be able to stand it? Whoever wanted to go could go, but he wasn't going. Huaisher completely forgot that he had the highest charm value and charm skill in the whole team. Today, he was just slacking off. Seeing that Huaisher wasn't willing to charm him or die, Lei Feizhou seemed to snort coldly and wasn't too happy. But you can actually try to seduce that old woman. AI Ching suggested sincerely. I think it'll be a piece of cake. You can forget about it. Huaisher recalled the layers of wrinkles on Papayah's face and couldn't help but shudder. In the end, everyone's discussion was inconclusive. They could only temporarily decide to split up and explore, and then meet up with old Xiao in his room at dinner time to see if they could find any clues. In the current chaos, there was really no place to start. But when Huaisher walked in the corridor, he noticed that the remains of the crew on the ground seemed to have been touched. Other than the uniform that was still there, the ashes had all disappeared. They had been taken away. Doesn't this prove that Paracelsus has taken action? Huaisher suddenly had a headache. He miscalculated. Although a certain amount of source substance was consumed during the creation of androids, the materials could actually be recycled and reused. In other words, after a batch of androids died, the ashes could be collected and poured into a petri dish, boiled and soaked, and a new batch could quickly grow out. It was more convenient than leaks. Moreover, now that the night had suddenly come and shrouded the entire sea area, it was hard to say when it would light up again. In other words, the android's endurance was greatly increased. I feel that the situation is not good. Huaisher sighed and suddenly stopped in his tracks. He smelled blood. It was in the direction of the entrance to the warehouse. Vampires were innately sensitive to the smell of blood, even more sensitive than a dog's nose, especially this kind of precious blood with a foreign smell. It was under the stairs. So, that guy Yujun violated 2 of the 3 prohibitions on the ship last night at once? No, maybe he violated all 3 prohibitions. The 3 prohibitions only apply between last night and 6 o'clock today, which is the moment when the sun sets and the night comes again. AI Ching said, "There should be no danger down there now. If you don't feel at ease, I can help you sneak in." Huaisher stood in the shadows and instantly felt as if his body had become transparent. It was as if he had become a ghost again. It seemed that AI Ching's sneak had taken effect. After checking his equipment again, he carefully stepped into the darkness of the warehouse. Unexpectedly, there wasn't a hideous demon's lair below. There was not even the sound of water flowing that was usually heard at the bottom of the cruise ship. In the silence, only the low roar of the engine room could be heard. At the entrance, Huaisher also saw a few lines of dirty footprints, as if someone had already gone in, and there were also traces of someone coming out. There was no blood, and probably not many parts were missing. Huaisher felt a lot more at ease. When he passed by the engine room, the boiler room, and the electronic control room, Huaisher was still worried and went in to take a look, but it seemed that the disappearance of the crew did not affect or hinder the operation of the cruise ship. Everything was normal. It was as if it was being maintained by pairs of invisible hands. Walking in it felt as if he was walking through countless invisible souls, and he felt a chill. After Huaisher closed the door, he breathed a sigh of relief. Regardless of the principle, as long as the ship could move, it was fine. He was simply immune to this kind of haunted and supernatural phenomenon. What a joke. He grew up in the Stone Marrow Hall and had seen all kinds of things. This was nothing to him. It didn't take long for him to follow the smell of blood and find a corpse. Or rather, Yujun's corpse. There was nothing to hide or cover at all. It was lying on the ground at the end of the corridor like a beach sunbathing. Dark blood flowed all over the ground, and the stench was overwhelming. He had only died for one night, but it seemed like he had been abandoned for many days. The rotten bones were almost exposed. The swollen corpse was full of maggots. There was no doubt that he had been killed. The headless horseman that represented death had fallen into death, and the headless horseman had also lost his head when he died. The white bones of the headless corpse were exposed in the stench, and there were still traces of it being rummaged through. Huaisher pinched his nose and leaned over. He squatted down, endured the nausea and dizziness from the bottom of his heart, and took a careful look. Then, of course, he couldn't see anything. He wasn't a forensic doctor himself, and he hadn't learned any autopsy skills. It was even more impossible for Van Helsing to know how to collect evidence from corpses. If he could see it, then Yujun was really dead. It was almost rotten. Can you see anything? Huaisher asked. Wait a moment. Take a look at the situation around you. AI Qing commanded. Then there was a faint sound of dice rolling. The dim warehouse seemed to instantly light up, and all the scenes were vivid in their eyes, including the mosquitoes that flew up. He was killed by someone. After a short moment of thought, AI Qing simply made a meaningless judgment. Then she added, he was killed twice by different people. Huh, you'll know when you look behind you. AI Qing guided Huaisher to look at the place in the middle of the corridor where the blood had just appeared, all the way to where Yujun's corpse was now. The headless horseman's stigmata doesn't mean that the sublimator has no head. It's just that after modification and correction, the life system of the sublimator has been modified in advance, transferring the function of thinking to the soul and preserving it in the body. This reduces the importance of the brain and head, and even if they are lost, they won't die. In other words, even if their head is cut off, they can still live for a long time. At worst, they can just put another one on. AI Qing said, when he walked to the middle of the corridor, he was attacked. Someone hid in the corner and cut off his head. It was clean and neat. Then Yujun was scared and wanted to run forward, but he didn't expect that there was another person in front of him. This time, he was killed cleanly and completely. 2 people, twice. There wasn't even a trace of struggle. Huaisher felt a little headache, but immediately AI Qing once again provided an even worse conjecture. Or, after he was attacked, he ran forward because there was someone he knew in front of him. Then, he died in the hands of his allies. Huaisher sucked in a breath of cold air. There's a mole terminate the transaction. At this moment, Why sure heard the sound of dice rolling continuously. Chapter 130. At this moment, Huai Sure heard the sound of the dice continuously ringing. Not only Huai Sure, Ai Qing even saw with her own eyes that the dice in KP's hand that seemed to be able to control the world jumped out of his palm and began to madly roll and jump on the table. Once, twice, thrice, 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 fine and noisy sounds were incessant. But this time, she didn't see the usual nasty smile on KP's face. Instead, there was a trace of doubt and astonishment. It was as if the story was out of control. Every time the dice jumped, it represented the judgment of a certain event. In other words, in a split second, who knows how many things were rearranged and modified. It was as if a drum was beating on the heart, making people dizzy, and couldn't help but sweat profusely. No, in fact, Huai Sure really began to feel dizzy and was sweating profusely. He staggered back 2 steps, violently vomiting, feeling the pain in his lungs become more and more intense, as if his soul was being burned by fire. In an instant, he almost didn't even have the strength to stand. Only cold sweat continuously fell from his cheeks to the ground. In the midst of the violent gasping, his vision turned black. He felt a burst of dizziness, almost fainting and falling to the ground. Even Ai Qing's voice became distant and indistinct. Was he poisoned? He immediately reacted, leaving the corpse on the ground, turned around and walked towards the exit of the warehouse, wanting to go back to the room to find the antidote. But he was even more afraid. What kind of poison was hidden in Yujun's corpse that made him, a third-rank vampire, lose all his fighting strength in an instant? In the midst of staggering and swaying, he gathered all his strength, little by little climbed up the ladder, and walked out of the warehouse entrance. Before he had time to open his mouth, he felt a sudden shock at the back of his head. It was as if he had been hit with a stick. But he didn't feel any pain. Instead, he couldn't feel anything, falling straight to the ground, his face hitting the floor, faintly hearing excited shouts behind him. "I caught him," a voice excitedly said. "This kid must have found something good in the warehouse." "Not here. Bring it back first. Bring it back."
"When did you?"
"No,
"When I saw my
bring it to
son
a
on
place
TV
where
on the
there's
dark
no
web."
one. See
Crow
if there's
pointed at his
anything
phone
valuable on
and
it.
said,
After
"I'm
you're
your
done,
loyal fan.
throw it into the sea.
Have you received any
Another
tips from
voice
me?"
urged him
"You
on.
get 10 yuan
Huai Sure
every
felt
day."
himself being pulled
The
by
audience
someone.
should sit
One of his
properly
legs was
in
pulled
the
forward,
auditorium.
and
KP's
Huai Sure
expression
felt his
became
face
gloomy.
rubbing against the
"You're
deck.
interfering
To
with
be
the
honest,
story."
it was cruel and
I'm
refreshing.
just making some slight
However,
corrections to your boring
he still
story.
felt terrible.
Crow
He
whistled.
couldn't even move a finger.
Even if it's
until a
documentary
vaguely
literature,
familiar
there's
voice
no need to
sounded.
be so
"What are
stubborn
you
about
doing?"
every detail.
"That's
right?
right." Or
Opposite KP,
have you become
Crow
one
nodded
of
in
those
satisfaction.
rigid bingastics?
It's about time for the
You'll
plot
only
to
make
speed
things
up
more difficult
if we
for
keep
him.
wasting words
Isn't
on
that
the
what you
atmosphere.
want?
The
Crow asked
audience will
back,
say that we're
as
filling it
one
up.
of the managers
You,
of heaven,
KP's face
and one of the
twitched.
3 human natures created by the Utopia. Didn't you come here because of your doubts about Huai Sure? Why do you have to be so secretive and pretend to be fair? Every player is fair. But the difficulties we face are different, right? Crow tilted her head and looked at him. "We're so familiar with each other. Don't play word games. To be honest, I don't object if you want to increase the difficulty." KP's expression became suspicious. He did not know what she was up to. If he didn't have this aptitude, I wouldn't have chosen him to be my contractor, so you can bring it on. No matter what you've prepared, he won't lose. Crow made a firm decision and told him word by word, no matter what you've prepared, he will not lose. Is that so? KP looked at her quietly. After a long time, he suddenly smiled happily. Then, I'm looking forward to it. He threw the dice in his hand. With a tearing sound, the sound of paper tearing was heard again. A basin of cold water was splashed on Huaisher's face. Huaisher opened her eyes from the dizziness and felt that she was finally awake. She panted heavily and struggled to get up from the ground, but she couldn't. There were several times when she ended up lying on the ground in a sorry state, fainting from thirst for blood. An indifferent voice asked, "How long has it been since you last drank blood?" Huaisher was stunned for a moment. Thinking carefully, it seemed that ever since he got on the ship, he had not drunk that kind of thing. Quite long. A vegetarian vampire. The girl named Gila seemed to be amused. She looked at him struggling to get up from the ground, but she did not have any intention of helping him, until Huaisher turned over with difficulty and saw the silver-haired girl standing by his feet. He was a little uncertain. "I remember I was hit by a stick." Gila looked at the book in her hand coldly. "If you're talking about the two guys who were about to throw you into the sea, yes. Anyway, thank you. I just hate being disturbed." In this remote room, the girl raised her amber eyes and looked at him. "If you can walk, please leave this place as soon as possible." Okay. Huaisher smiled bitterly and struggled to get up from the ground. After the initial pain, which was similar to a drug addiction, had passed, the remaining dizziness was slightly better. However, this was only the final radiance of the setting sun. If he did not replenish his blood plasma in time, it would not be long before his condition became more and more serious. The reason vampires were called vampires was because this excessively fierce dark stigmata needed to regularly absorb life force to maintain its operation. If he ignored it, the backlash would be more and more serious. In the end, his stigmata would start to digest itself, first sucking him dry and then melting away. Only a dried corpse would be left. He had to return to his room as soon as possible. No matter what happened, he had to take care of it first. Thinking of the few red tubes waiting for him in the room, his heart became more and more thirsty. However, he held the door and did not leave. After hesitating for a moment, he turned back and said, "About last night, I'm sorry." Gila raised her eyes and glanced at him. "Are you talking about the attack on my secondary sexual characteristics?" Yes. Gila nodded and asked, "Then what are you trying to do by saying all this now?" "Probably to apologize." Huaisher smiled bitterly. "Anyway, I'm sorry. I hope you can forgive me." "Forgive?" Gila frowned, as if she was thinking about something. She lowered her head and suddenly looked at the thick book in her hand. "Forgive, page 741. Forgive." The pages of the book were as thin as a cicada's wings and were filled with dense handwriting, just like an encyclopedia. Very soon, he flipped to the middle section and saw the word "forgive" and the related explanation. It seemed to be written with two different colored pens, one black and one red. Huaisher tiptoed slightly to take a look, only to find that it was 2 rows of densely packed lists. Very soon, the girl buried in the book looked up at him and said coldly, "I forgive you." It was as if she had just stepped on him. It was normal. Huaisher was stunned. This kind of thing could be decided just by flipping through a book. But then the girl suddenly frowned. "No, the harassment of secondary sexual characteristics is unforgivable." "I see." As the pages turned on their own, the girl's eyes jumped between the countless words and finally led to a branch suggestion. In an instant, hostility appeared in the girl's eyes. Huaisher's vision blurred. A slender knife fell from her sleeve and was held tightly by 5 fingers. In an instant, it was pressed against Huaisher's neck, accurately pressing against the artery. Her cold eyes were filled with wariness. Gila asked coldly, "What do you want to do to me?" "I accidentally touched it last night, and you only reacted now. Isn't this reaction a little too long?" "Wait, don't do it." Huaisher was stunned. "I just want to—" He stuttered for a long time before sighing helplessly. "I want to be friends with you, okay?" "Friends." Gila frowned. The dictionary in her right hand flipped again, and finally stopped at the front part. This time, the distance was close enough, and Huaisher quietly saw the definition of the friends column. A sucker who will die for you at a critical moment. Someone who needs to be careful and vigilant. Highly dangerous. Make sure to be used with caution when necessary. Damn, that's so hardcore. What dictionary is this? Make one for me too. Huaisher was about to break out in cold sweat. He could only try to open his eyes wide, as if he was sincere in his awkwardness. No. Gila coldly refused, and then put away the knife in her hand. "Now, please leave." Okay. I don't even have the value of being a scapegoat at a critical moment." Feeling a sense of defeat from being looked down upon, Huaisher retreated resentfully and closed the door for her. She held onto the wall as she walked out in a sorry state. It was not until she returned to her room that she sat on the chair and let out a sigh of relief. He felt cold sweat seeping out of his back like a tap that had been turned on. He drank the blood in the test tube in one gulp, feeling the sweet refreshment from Van Helsing and the physiological disgust from Huaisher. Huaisher couldn't tell whether he felt good or wanted to vomit. He just felt that the part that belonged to Van Helsing was gradually growing in his consciousness. Gradually, it was assimilated by the ice-like obsession, along with the nauseating stench of the blood and the hunger that spread in his lungs. It was getting harder and harder to distinguish between you and me. After a long rest, he finally caught his breath and knocked on old Zhao's door. No one responded behind the door. It opened with a push. The stench overflowed from it. In the silence, Huaisher covered his face in despair. F***CK. Beside her, the woman with a face full of dust was the first to bear the brunt of the light. A burn mark appeared on her hand, tearing apart the layer of makeup covering her skin. It briefly revealed the loose skin covered in wrinkles and dark scars that looked like age spots. "A believer?" Someone said with a trembling voice. She's a believer." In the entire restaurant, everyone stood up in shock. At first, they were in disbelief. Then, their eyes became fierce and ferocious. In the crowd, a woman with unkempt hair stood up directly and pointed at Hela. She seemed to be chanting something in her mouth. But soon, the invisible curse was bounced away. A faint halo rose above Hela's head. Stigmata, the symbol of a believer. At the same time, it was also the only level 1 stigmata in the Holy Spirit lineage. Whether it was the righteous, the angels, or even Lazarus, all the stigmata in the Holy Spirit lineage extended from this foundation. It was different from the other lineages, where tens of thousands of paths led to one. It used one as the foundation and extended thousands of paths before finally returning to nothingness. The reason why the Holy Spirit lineage could reach such a large scale was related to this structure. As long as one drank the blessed holy water and was baptized, then the baptized person would become a potential member of the believer. In other words, as long as one drank the holy water and was baptized by the priest, then after the sublimation was completed, one could automatically become a believer by chanting 2 sentences from the Holy Bible. It was simple and convenient, with no side effects, fast and convenient, and it could be said that there was almost no cost at all. Even if only 1 out of 10 people chose to become a believer, then the Holy Spirit lineage would gain a loyal member. Most of the parents of the babies who were baptized at birth were devout believers. Under the influence of such a family atmosphere, very few people would make other choices. Moreover, the Holy Spirit lineage had a large business, and the treatment was never bad. The use of the stigmata of believer could be said to be widespread. In terms of cost-effectiveness, there were not many who could compare. On this foundation, the Holy Spirit lineage had grown to a terrifying scale that almost dominated the entire West in just a few hundred years. And what supported this behemoth was countless believers at the grassroots level. There were countless ascenders like hell. Even the name stigmata came from the scars that appeared on the body of the believers after they advanced. If it was anywhere else, Hela would definitely be respected and welcomed by the people. No matter where she went, no one would make things difficult for her. Except here. Except on this ship where the dark creatures gathered. Here, except for Huaishur, everyone was a sinner who could not tolerate the dark creatures of the Holy Spirit lineage.